All right, in this particular video, I'd like to go through 2012 paper 2, all right, general proficiency geography, specifically looking at section C and section D. So just to remind you all, you will see multiple repeats from previous papers. As a matter of fact, on the channel, you will see 2011 paper. From 2011, 2012, and onwards, you might see a lot of repeats for section C and section D. So what I'm going to do, the main questions which are often repeated, I will just simply attach the link to our previous video if it exists. All right, I'll actually put it in the description so it'll be easier for you to navigate and also to understand exactly what the question entails. All right, also to minimize time as well. Now, section C, let's go through quickly. Now, we are in fact in question number 5. Study table 1 below, which shows population change in several districts in St. Lucia between 1990 and the year 2001. That is in fact 11 years. Now, answer the questions that follow. Table 1, basically, take approximately 1 minute, all right, and observe the table. You are seeing selected districts in St. Lucia for that same period. We have Vieux Fort, Labrie, Micoud, Choiseul, Soufrière, as well as Gros-Islet. All right, so we are seeing here population for the year 1990. We're also seeing for the year 2001, as well as, in fact, the change in the population. Now, students, bear in mind for me quickly, there can, in fact, be a positive or an increase in the population, all right? And it can also be a decrease in the population. All right, whenever you see a negative sign, that is indicative of the fact that there is in fact a decrease in the population. All right, okay, let's go through quickly. Take approximately 1 minute and look at the particular table for me, please. Now let's scroll down. Which district had the highest population increase? All right, for 1 mark. Now, students, we can automatically see that the highest population increase was in fact in Gros-Islet, which is at 43.7%. All right, that's a positive number. That is the highest change in terms of the actual percentage of the population. All right. Secondly, what is the percentage change in the population in Choiseul? All right, we are seeing here the actual percentage change was in fact minus 6.4%, which means there was a percentage decline in the population. All right. Thirdly, let's go through quickly. What was the actual population change in Vieux Fort? Let's go back to the particular table here. All right, we are actually seeing Vieux Fort was 13,140. All right, and we are seeing the population in the year 2001 was 14,561. All right, let's calculate that quickly. Now, based on the calculation here, we can actually see 14,561 minus 13,140. Given the time frame, we can see here that the population from 1990 increased, right? It increased by how much? 1,421. All right, keep that in mind for me, please. So as you can see here, there was in fact a 10.8% increase, but the question asks us by how much exactly was the population increase. All right, so keep that in mind for me. Part 4. Which district had the smallest population change? Now, folks, when we are talking about change, it doesn't matter if it is a positive change or if it is in fact a negative change. We are looking for technically the smallest population change, and a good indicator of this would in fact be the percentage change. All right, and we are seeing here Labrie, which is in fact minus 2.2%. all right, that was in fact the smallest numerical value there. So Labrie is in fact associated with the smallest population change. Now part 3, part B, my bad. B part 1, describe 2 economic benefits of international migration to the Caribbean. Now, first and foremost, we have to understand international migration is in fact a very significant input to the GDP of any given Caribbean country. As a matter of fact, it adds revenue or it adds to the GDP of the country, which is in fact an economic gain or a financial gain, which is a very essential thing, especially when it is associated with processes related to development. That's 1. 2, the country itself, all right, the country of interest, right, is in fact given a greater degree of recognition. All right, it is actually given a greater degree of recognition, which simply means that that particular country can potentially become even much more popular, and in doing so, all right, it can add further to their economic potential and by extension towards the employment opportunities, all right, to the country itself. Now, B part 2 outline 2 strategies that have been implemented to reduce urbanization in the named Caribbean country. Now, folks, I would like to talk about Trinidad. All right, Trinidad in particular, the most southerly of all the Caribbean islands. Okay, now Trinidad is in fact two strategies that were in fact implemented. Number one, there was in fact the decentralization or decentralizing, all right, of businesses from the capital. Now, in the early 90s, right, you would have seen everybody would have gravitated towards the capital, primarily because it is, in fact, the area where administrative buildings and also employment opportunities were, in fact, very, very pronounced. All right. However, today, which is in the year 2022, we see that there is, in fact, a significant degree to which businesses have actually disseminated from the capital into different peripheral areas, spreading across the country itself, making it easier and reducing the influx of persons from the rural communities to the city. All right, so that is one. Number two, now looking at it from a different perspective, right? Urbanization is the movement of people from the rural areas to the city. Now, in Trinidad, there have in fact been a significant degree of infrastructural expansion relating to road networks, interconnected road networks, and also the expansion of the highways and the roadways, as a matter of fact. All right. Now, this may not seem as much, but that is in fact a significant measure, right? This expansion in terms of the infrastructure would have actually facilitated um, a better ease of access, right, towards the different areas, right, where people would not have to go through the hassle of simply of actually relocating, physically moving their from their original point of settlement to the city. All right, by the expansion of road networks and the infrastructural development taking place, there would have been the establishment of different subsidiaries, not only for business places, but basically every form of economic activity throughout different parts of the Caribbean, throughout different parts of the island. All right. So infrastructural expansion is in fact a very significant aspect that we still in fact consider, and specifically referring to road networks, that is. Okay. Part C, with reference to specific examples in the Caribbean, explain how three of the following factors, all right, may influence population distribution. Now, let us begin with relief, right? When we are talking about relief, we are also referring to the topography or the slope angle and the elevation of the land masses. All right. For this particular concept, I would like to focus on St. Kitts and Nevis. All right. All right. Look carefully on this particular map. We can actually see from an aerial view. All right. This yellowish brown coloration is central part of St. Kitts. All right. This island here is St. Kitts, and the one at the bottom is Nevis. Right. In St. Kitts, we are seeing the centralized region is in fact associated with very steep topography. And we must bear in mind that very little, all right, as a matter of fact, very, very little number of persons reside there. The majority of people simply reside in the peripheral areas, which are in fact gentler areas, which is relatively closer to the coast. These elevated peaks, right, in these particular islands are in fact too steep and it hinders accessibility. The same thing is in fact applicable to Nevis, which is the island, the southeasterly part. All right. Now we must bear in mind that accessibility is a major issue. All right, given the steep topography, limited road networks, instability of the landmass as well. So it is ease of access is in fact a little bit challenging, right, for the centralized region for both Nevis and St. Kitts. Now, like I indicated earlier, the peripheral regions, close proximity to the coast, you actually have gently undulating land in those sections. You will have a much more significant, all right, amount of the population residing in those areas, rather than those in the centralized mountainous regions of the island. Now, apart from that, these islands are in fact relatively small and harbors, in fact, harbor, right, a relatively small population, all right, roughly, say, give or take, 53 to 54,000 based upon a 2020 statistic. Okay, now the second one is in fact natural vegetation. That particular country, I'll be focusing on Guyana. All right, Guyana's interior is in fact associated with very dense tropical forest. Apart from the forest, which is in fact very dense, very layered, all right, we must bear in mind that these areas are in fact traversed by significant amounts of large watercourses. But focusing on the natural vegetation, the density of the forest is in fact a major obstacle, or I should say hindrance, to significant population distribution. As a matter of fact, Guyana's population is roughly It's like roughly close to 800,000 persons, roughly, right? Average, based upon a 2020 statistic. All right. Much of the population actually for Guyana actually resides in the in closer proximity to the coast. All right, in closer proximity to the coast. However, there are in fact isolated communities. Some of them are in fact relatively dispersed, which may transcend further into the forested region. But the distribution is in fact relatively small. All right. Despite the size of Guyana, which is in fact way bigger than that of Trinidad, all right, there is in fact a lot less persons residing there. All right. Okay, keep that in mind for me, please. Now, with respect to soils, I like to focus on Trinidad. All right, and Trinidad, our central region or the Caroni Plains, all right, in Trinidad is in fact associated with gently undulating lands. All right. As a result of that, it would in fact be able to harbor, all right, very fertile soils. Technically, because of materials being washed from the northern range and eventually having a settling or depositional effect within the Caroni region. All right. These soils, especially along the floodplains and whatnot, provide significant fertile soils for agricultural productivity. As a matter of fact, in Trinidad, the west central region is in fact significantly populated, and the distribution is in fact relatively large. All right, so this centralized region here, as you can see, there are in fact numerous interconnecting water courses and stuff like that. Especially, well, I should say focusing primarily on the western fringe because it is in fact much more sheltered. All right, the Caroni region is in fact unique. Right, these soils are used for were in fact used for cultivation in the past, and it still is today. Many settlements have in fact gravitated towards these particular regions because of the topography, and because of that, the soil depth and fertility is in fact significantly high. Okay. Now, with respect to employment opportunities, I would like to talk about Trinidad again. All right. And if you realize on the western fringe of Trinidad, because of the fact it is in close proximity to the Gulf, which is much more sheltered, we must bear in mind that that western end of Trinidad harbors a lot of settlement structures, infrastructural development, and stuff like that. And as a result, it would in fact be associated with a greater degree of interconnecting road networks, which would contribute to a greater degree of accessibility. Hence, the reason why the population is greatly distributed along that particular region. But one thing we must bear in mind with respect to employment opportunities, many businesses, all right, are in fact established there, all right, on the western central fringe of Trinidad. Well, generally on the western fringe of Trinidad. All right. There are many companies. For example, the Point Listas Industrial Estate is a very, very large area. All right. We should keep that in mind. There are in fact that area of Port of Spain. Although it is further north, it is generally on the western fringe of the island. All right. Even in the city of San Fernando, which is also the western fringes. All right. We actually understand that there is in fact a lot of the population well distributed in those particular areas. All right, let's move on quickly into question 6a. Study table 2, which shows the contribution of agriculture to GDP and the value of banana exports were three countries for the year 1990 and the year 2000. And answer the questions that follow. Look properly at the table. All right. This is the contribution of agriculture to GDP and value of banana exports. We are seeing St. Vincent, St. Lucia, and Dominica, the three particular Caribbean countries. All right, so take approximately 1 minute, right, and look at this particular table for me. Understand exactly what is taking place. Look at particular trends and particular patterns. Okay. You can pause the video if you wish. Now, what was the combined value of banana exports in the year 2003 for 1 mark? For St. Vincent, we are seeing 11. For St. Lucia, we are seeing 16. All right, and for Dominica, we are seeing 5. All right, so when we add up all of them, 16, 5 plus 16, which is in fact 20, 21, 21 plus 11, that is 32. Now you have to put the units, that is 32 US million dollars for banana exports. Keep that in mind for me, please. Make sure you include your units. If you don't include your units, you will get it wrong. All right, keep that in mind for me, please. All right, so question with part 2. All right, which country had the biggest difference in the value of its banana exports between 1990 and the year 2003. Now, the biggest difference, if you look at it carefully in terms of the banana exports, right, for between both years, from 45 to 11 is not the biggest difference. But so far, we can see that St. Lucia from 70 in the year 1990 to the year, to 16, all right, in terms of million US dollars, to the year 2003, that is in fact the largest. So the answer would be St. Lucia. All right, this is the read right here. Good. Next question, part 3. What is the trend in the banana exports over the period? Now, students, look carefully. For all three countries, we are seeing a specific trend. From 1990 to the year 2003, for all three specific countries, we have seen, observing the initial values, we have seen, and also the final values in the year 2003, we have seen there is in fact an overall decline for all three countries in terms of banana exports from the year 1990 to the year 2003. An overall decline in exports of that particular resource. All right. Which country had the highest reliance on agriculture? Now look carefully at this. When they say reliance, we are not talking about exports really, We are talking about agriculture as a percentage of GDP. All right. And the area, the country, which is in fact derives the largest amount of reserve or GDP or money or percentage of that money from agriculture is in fact the one which is associated with the highest reliance on agriculture. All right. And look at it carefully. We can see significantly the largest values were typically associated with Dominica. As you can see, Dominica, 25 in the year 1990 percent of GDP and 18% in the year 2003, which exceeds St. Vincent and St. Lucia, respectively, for their specific period. All right, the answer would be Dominica. Okay. All right, so part B, let us describe 4 ways in which food processing or the garment industry is important in the Caribbean. Now, folks, 2 marks for each point, right? 4 ways. That means we're talking about 4 points here. You can choose either food processing or you can choose either garment. Do not choose both for the exam for me, please. They said either or. Well, they said or. All right. Let us go through quickly. Let us talk about food processing first. All right. Food processing first. Now, first and foremost, the food processing industry is in fact a very significant mechanism, all right, where it can be in fact associated with this establishment, all right, of a secondary industrial mechanism or within the industrial sector or the secondary sector, as a matter of fact, as it relates to employment opportunities. Okay, jobs can in fact be derived right from the food processing industry. On top of that, we must bear in mind that it improves right the GDP of the country primarily because once you are processing food, you are in fact producing or manufacturing a particular product which can simply be sold either locally or regionally. And that brings us to the third point. All right. The food processing industry would add a recognition to that particular country, given the fact that the exports of the said products, all right, would technically be dispersed or disseminated, I should say, from the home country, which is whatever Caribbean country I'm in fact talking about, to any given regional or perhaps international regions. All right, if the product is in fact said to be high standard or high quality, obviously that particular country would in fact be given a great degree of recognition. All right, so there's 3 points thus far. Number 4, the food processing industry, all right, is actually very important to the extent whereby it adds some level of stability, right, as it relates to food security for the specific country. All right. What do I mean by that? When we are talking about food security, if you are producing as a specific country, a Caribbean country, it would actually reduce your expenses as it relates to imports. All right. If you are producing, your expenses for importation of food would diminish. All right. Now, the establishment of the food processing industries are in fact important because this is a dynamic change. It actually captures a transition, all right, or a bridge, really, linking agricultural productivity right here, which is a primary economic activity, and the food processing industry harbors the bulk or large quantities or excesses of such perishable goods, and they utilize that either in the process of packaging or manufacturing, extending the shelf life of said products, or perhaps even creating a new product totally. So the food processing industry is in fact an industrial activity rather, which falls within the criteria of secondary economic activities. So it adds to diversification of the economy. All right. Now, the same thing would in fact be applicable to the garment industry. As a matter of fact, I mean, let us look at it from a different perspective. The garment industry, in fact, provides a basic amenity, all right, a basic necessity, which is in fact clothing. All right. On top of that, the same concept of employment opportunities can be granted. The level of recognition can also be improved, and at the same time, we also have it reduces our importation, right, of clothing from significant areas, either regionally or internationally. All right, and at the same time, it also aids in terms of diversification of the economy. So it's the same benefits, really, except that we are talking about two different entities. We are talking about food and also clothing here. All right. So that is understandable. Part C. C part 1, with reference to a named Caribbean country, explain how the tourism industry has been affected by the recent global economic recession. Include 3 points in your answer. Now, I'm actually going to refer to Trinidad and Tobago, specifically referring to Tobago. All right. A lot of tourists visit Tobago because it is very scenic. It's very beautiful. But at the same time, if you have a global economic recession, people don't have that flexibility and that financial flexibility to travel from point A to point B or travel across the world. All right. So global economic recessions are in fact associated with limited amounts of financial flexibility, right, for the purpose of leisure and recreation. Now, with respect to Tobago, one way in which the tourism industry was affected was that um, there was, in fact, the most obvious effect where low tourist influx was associated both on season as well as off season. Now, off season is already bad, right, where relatively low influx of tourists exist. But on season, which is supposed to be the time when they were supposed to be experiencing a high influx of tourists, low tourist visits were associated, all right, within that period there. All right, that's one. Two, all right, hotels and resort owners, all right, suffered a significant financial blow, primarily because they still have to maintain, all right, their their perimeter, all right, they still have to maintain their hotels and their surroundings, and in doing so, you have to actually still hire people, all right, in an attempt to facilitate that level of maintenance. In doing so, they would have incurred significant losses, all right, economic losses, because profitability would be very, very low, all right, perhaps non-existent in some instances, okay, and that would have incurred a significant loss, economic or financial loss, all right. Um, with respect to contractual workers, those persons who are hired temporarily, as well, all right, we have to understand that given the fact that there are in fact global economic recession taking place, given which means that there is in fact less influx of tourists in the particular country, those temporary workers would in fact would have to potentially be laid off from their jobs. All right, so unemployment rates would have increased, especially for those persons who do not secure a permanent or a permanent means of employment. All right. Those contractual workers were also, many of them were in fact placed on breadlines as well. The same thing applied to temporary workers. All right. So that's a serious, serious blow to the social aspect of the country, the socio-economic aspect of the particular country. All right. Then quickly into part 2, explain 3 challenges faced by either mining or fishing or forestry in a named Caribbean country. Students, you have to choose one in the exam. All right, do not choose all. However, in the 2011 paper, all right, there is a video I did in the channel. I will post the link in the description where we went through every single one of these, mining, fishing, and forestry in detail. All right, highlighting the 3 challenges faced by each of them. All right, in the named Caribbean country as well. All right, so I'll post the link in the description. Be sure to click on it. You will see it. There will be a timestamp as well. All right, students, don't mind my little diagram here, right? So I'm just gonna draw something across here. This little red dot is in fact symbolic of let us talk about cocoa, right? Our cocoa estate, right? We have multiple cocoa estates in Trinidad, but this little area here is called the Ortinola Estate. All right, it is situated in Maracas, St. Joseph. All right, that region there. Now, this particular estate is in fact associated with growing cocoa, right, which is in fact utilized, it is sold, it is exported, all right, primarily for the production of the production of chocolate as well. There are in fact certain companies right here in Trinidad, all right, which are in fact producing chocolate, making chocolate on a very large extent. It is being sold in our local grocery shelves and stuff like that. You will actually see it. So this area is the Ortinola Estate. Maracas, St. Joseph specifically, it is associated with cocoa cultivation. All right. Okay, keep that in mind for me, please. Now we can also see other repeats there. For example, 7b, we have to list 4 important rules of agriculture. Now this was mentioned already in a previous past paper. All right. However, let's go through it quickly. Just a list out. 4 important rules of agriculture. Number 1, agriculture is responsible for the provision of food for the nation. There's 1. Agriculture adds to the GDP of the economy of the island, in the Caribbean. All right. Generally speaking, agriculture is a form of livelihood. All right. Agriculture adds recognition, all right, to the country as well. Okay, now describe 2 problems facing peasant farmers in the Caribbean. Now, peasant farmers, the first point is that, before I jump to the point, let us bear in mind that peasant farmers are in fact those who engage, all right, in monocultural activities, multicultural activities or multi-cropping mechanisms, multi, not mono, multi, all right, which means the planting of a variety of crops because they have a very small land space available. Now, the actual problem is that they can in fact be affected by pests and diseases. All right, they can be primarily because they don't have significant amount of chemical treatment to even deter existing pests, and as a result, they can suffer significant financial losses. All right, or they can suffer in terms of their social aspect, primarily because they utilize their produce for their own sustenance. All right, for their own levels of consumption. That is one. Now, secondly, all right, we must bear in mind that they can in fact be affected negatively by certain hazards, all right? For instance, flooding, right? Certain events, all right? For instance, flooding, all right, which can be induced by heavy rainfall, primarily during the wet season, or they can also be influenced by drought, which can contribute to their crops being subjected to decline, their productivity, sorry, subjected to decline. All right, both drought and floods can actually cause them to lose crops, lose productivity, and essentially compromise, all right, their means of livelihood as well. All right. This is in fact something very important because in the Caribbean in the past couple of years, all right, we have seen some kind of strange or anomalous weather conditions. For example, in the year 2017, a personal account is that we would have observed in Trinidad that we would have observed that there was in fact a lot more rain, right? 2016 or 2017, somewhere around there. There was in fact a lot more rain in the dry season, and the wet season was somewhat drought-like. All right, the wet season was in fact associated with minimal amounts of rainfall. All right, so keep that in mind for me, please. All right, so we're gonna do question number 3, part 1. account for the declining contribution of agriculture to the economy of the Caribbean, use the following headings. Now, just remember for me quickly, when we are talking about declining contribution of agriculture, that means agriculture is in fact becoming less popular. All right, it is in fact losing its grip, right, with respect to the country itself. Now, why is it, all right, why is it that agriculture is declining as it relates to these particular headings here? Let's go through quickly. Now, with respect to the cost of production, all right, is in fact becoming very expensive. All right, it is in fact becoming very high. The cost of production is increasing progressively. As a matter of fact, right now, all right, there are in fact many products, all right, agricultural products and produce, I should say, all right, increasing. The cost of it is increasing, and the reason for that is because the price of food, all right, is also which is, for example, if you're engaged actively in livestock farming, for example, you have poultry and stuff like that, the price of food is in fact increasing for the animals. Also, the price of chemicals with respect to arable cultivation and stuff like that, that is also associated with increases as well. So the entire production processes based upon the inputs, right, that is necessary as it relates to electricity, as it relates to water, as it relates to chemicals, as it relates to food for the animals. All of these things are in fact increasing. The inputs for agricultural productivity is in fact increasing. All right, now that is contributing to major reduction in profitability and stuff like that. Now, with respect to prices, all right, we have to understand that the price of food in many parts of the world, right, the price of food today, right, is in fact increasing. We are in the year 2022, right? There are in fact so many issues, right, that is associated with production as we indicated previously. But the actual price of food in the groceries, all right, at the markets, they are in fact increasing. And many persons, all right, technically may have may tend to be deterred from cultivating, especially those original producers. They may be, you know what, we are actually making losses as it relates to the prices themselves. All right. And in a flip side to this particular point, we must bear in mind that um, prior to this particular year, which is 2022, prior to this year, we know for sure that we imported a lot of food from different parts of the world, right? And the prices were in fact relatively cheap. Hence the reason why, if imports are relatively cheap, like a couple years prior, right, then many countries will tend to deviate from agricultural productivity and focus more into industrial and tertiary activities, right, which they deem to be more efficient in terms of making money. All right, and this applies to market prices to which products and produce is in fact imported from. All right, they may in fact be relatively low in that regard. Okay, with respect to employment, all right, we have to understand also that agriculture is, in fact, given less recognition in the world today. As a matter of fact, many people are, in fact, culturally deviating from agriculture as a primary economic earner, as compared to yesteryear, as compared to the past. Today's world, we know for sure, employment opportunities are much more fixated upon industrial and tertiary economic activities because they are, in fact, much more efficient in terms of acquiring money within a faster period of time. Um, Agriculture has, in fact, become less inclined to provide some level of employment opportunities. All right, primarily because many people believe this to be much more arduous, much more time consuming. All right, and it is less efficient in terms of making money. With respect to acreage, we must bear in mind also that with population increases in the Caribbean, all right, we must bear in mind that many areas, many parts of land, in fact, being replaced by infrastructural development for settlement expansion, also for industrial expansion, and administrative areas are in fact being established. And in doing so, with the lateral spread and the increase in the population, less area is in fact designated for agriculture. Given this whole globalized world, the importation of food primarily in the Caribbean, is in fact high. As a matter of fact, in Trinidad, based on a 2014 statistic, we import approximately $5 billion worth in food annually. That is based on a 2014 statistic in Trinidad and Tobago. All right. But at the same time, space is a problem. When there is in fact declining space, lateral space for productivity and cultivation, or even livestock rearing and stuff like that, there would in fact be a significant decline in terms of the contribution of agriculture to the economy because there will be less agricultural productivity existing. All right. Part two quickly. Compare diversification in commercial arable farming, all right, in a named Caribbean country with the diversification in the prairies of Canada. Your response must include 2 points of comparison. Now, when we are talking about diversification of a Caribbean country, I like to focus on Trinidad, and I will also like to focus on Canada, right? Because Canada is in fact the region we have to pay attention here. So Trinidad versus Canada. Now, in terms of the actual diversification, now the concept of diversification is associated with the expansion, all right? This expansion can either be lateral or it could also be related to individual plant species. Let us focus on the first point. Now, with respect to commercial arable farming, we are talking about plant crops, crop cultivation and planting and stuff like that. And in terms of the diversification, all right, in terms of lateral space, Canada actually can, in fact, facilitate a greater degree of expansion, all right, as it relates to lateral land space being utilized, all right, for cultivation, all right, primarily because of the fact that they are part of the North American mainland, all right, and they occupy a very, very large range, all right, as compared to Trinidad, which is in fact a small tropical island, all right, occupying a relatively small geographical area in comparison, all right, we simply do not have significant lateral land space to facilitate expansion processes. Now, secondly, with respect to diversification and actual crops, we must bear in mind that we in Trinidad, given our climatic condition, all right, given our well, yes, our soil structure to an extent, but given our climatic condition and growing seasons, we can simply harbor, right, a variety, a multitude of crops can be planted at any given point in time throughout the year, providing proper management initiatives are actually put in place. However, in terms of diversification in the Canadian prairies, they are limited with respect to very few types of crops. As a matter of fact, in Canada, I believe they cultivate my bad. They cultivate barley, all right. They cultivate rye, all right, and different form of oats as well, in different parts of Canada. All right, it is very restricted, and there is a narrow season for cultivation, which is primarily we can say roughly within 100 days, right, for the wheat production especially. All right, so keep that in mind for me, please. All right, let us begin with section D. We have a question 8E. Table 3 shows the number of people affected by five disasters in Dominica, using a scale of 1 centimeter to represent 500 people. Construct a bar graph. Now, there's a grid provided. Everybody know how to construct a bar graph, right? Remember, the bars must have the same width. There must be equal distances between bars. You must properly, right, label your axes, both in the x-axis and the y-axis. You must have a proper title. All right, and all of that will tantamount to 4 marks. Okay. All right, now if you look carefully on table 3, we can see a number of people affected by 5 disasters in Dominica. All right, total number affected, basically 95, 99, 2001, and 2004. All right, let's go through quickly. Take a minute and look at the table, all right? Identify the 2 types of hazards in the Caribbean and state what makes them hazards. Now, first and foremost, I just want to highlight that in the Caribbean, we have a variety, right? A multitude, I should say, all right? But two in particular, we can simply mention floods, right? And we can also mention earthquakes, all right? Because we are situated, the Caribbean is actually situated at a convergent plate boundary, all right? Really. Now, what happened is that those 2 types of hazards, what makes them hazards is that flooding can actually contribute to damage to apart from property, but at the same time, it can contribute to loss of lives, both humans and animals, especially if people are in close proximity to flood-prone areas, or are in fact greatly affected based upon the seasonal occurrences, all right, of these particular floods. Apart from that, in terms of earthquakes can technically contribute to a lot of loss of lives as well, and also damage to infrastructure. People can actually be hurt directly or indirectly, right? Primarily because of the fact that the vibrations on the surface of the earth can contribute to falling debris from, especially in the urban environments, can significantly affect or damage people. For example, in IMAX in Trinidad, all right, in the year 2017, there was a 6.9 magnitude earthquake, which contributed to materials falling off the building and crushing a vehicle. All right, a woman, she was in fact nearly close to being maimed. All right, so that's a very serious issue. Also, at the same time, we can have fallen electrical lines, which can contribute to fires and stuff like that. So these are in fact ways in which, right, they can influence harm, all right, especially upon human life. All right, we focus more on terms of human health and human life in this regard. Okay, now moving in very quickly, we also have described two ways in which natural hazards can be has affected the Caribbean country. Now, first and foremost, remember Grenada. All right, Grenada was struck by Hurricane Ivan. All right, in the year 2004. All right, Grenada was affected by Hurricane Ivan in the year 2004, which resulted in a lot of infrastructural damage. All right, and this contributed to a lot of damage not only to the infrastructure, all right, but also upon the economy because rebuilding was in fact a major issue. On top of that, there was also a major devastation upon the spice industry. As a matter of fact, in Trinidad, we actually had to send saplings, right, of nutmeg from our northern range to Grenada, right, to actually allow them to help them to rebuild in terms of their industry as well. It was really bad, right, and that also affects the livelihood. It also affects the economic earnings and the GDP of the country. So it is an economic as well as a social issue as it relates to as well as an environmental issue as well as it relates to the effect of that particular hazard in the year 2004. All right. Part C. Choose a natural hazard in a named Caribbean country and explain how its impact can be reduced by using two individual precautions. Now, when we are focusing on two individual precautions, let us pay attention. Well, hurricanes. Let the name the natural hazard be hurricane, right? I said choose a natural hazard, right? And let us focus upon an area like say Puerto Rico. Now, this Caribbean island is actually situated further north of all the others. As a matter of fact, this area was greatly affected by hurricanes in the past. All right. Two individual approaches can simply be number one, people can simply stock up on canned foods as well as potable water, as well as medical care. In the event that food availability is in fact compromised, water and its potability is in fact compromised as well. You have bottled water, whatever the case may be, clean water simply for the purpose of sanitation as well as medical care, just in case anyone in the household is in fact wounded by the effects of the hurricane winds or swirling projectiles. All right, that is one. Secondly, individuals can also ensure that there is a proper evacuation route, especially if persons are in relatively close proximity to the coast. They must quickly and expeditiously exit the region which is associated with the greatest effect. All right, because storm surges can simply batter the coastal areas, causing deaths. So they can simply move from the coastal environment and move further inland in specific shelters, but the evacuation route must in fact be clear. That is the reason why they must adhere, all right, to bulletins, all right, which is in fact something very, very important. If someone is in fact going to a specific shelter, they must do so very quickly, and at the same time, they must know exactly where the specific evacuation routes are. All right, this shouldn't be a fly-by-night thing. This should be something which is properly planned, and they should know exactly where they should be going. All right. All right. So, with respect to two national precautions that should be taken as it relates to hurricanes, all right, in Trinidad. All right. One is in fact the dissemination, the very significant dissemination of information, all right, as it relates to the approaching hurricane. Because what we know about hurricanes is that they can in fact be determined, all right, they can in fact be observed via satellite imagery. So these updates can be provided, right, to the persons, especially those who are the most at risk. But generally, given the small island, the size of Trinidad, everybody would basically have to take precaution, right? But at the same time, the national body, which is the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, will simply have to issue bulletins and flood warnings, all right, as well as warn persons in close proximity to the peripheral areas of the coast, right, to simply vacate these areas, especially those which are prone to flooding and storm surges. That is one. Secondly, all right, there can in fact be certain measures put in place in terms of properly identifying sheltered areas or shelters, right, for persons who are at risk to simply vacate their original premises and move towards these areas, right, in an attempt to minimize harm or even potential death. All right. The identification of shelters, as well as the clear indication in terms of and the processes that are in fact involved in terms of going to these particular areas to seek harbor, to seek shelter, all right, from the effects of very strong winds and also the effects of flooding as well. All right, so that is actually very, very important. Good. All right, very quickly, we in question number 9A, Table 4 presents information on the percentage distribution of global greenhouse gases in 2002. All right, we are seeing here nitrous oxide, methane, CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons, carbon dioxide. We see percentages of 5, 10, 13, and 72 respectively. All right, now all of them will tantamount to 100%. Good. Now everybody should remember, should know that if you have to construct a pie chart, which is the asking you in question part A, with diameter of 6 centimeters, you have to use your ruler, you have to use your protractor. If the diameter is 6 centimeters, the radius will be 3. So you have to measure 3 centimeters, 0 to 3 centimeters on your ruler, and make a nice big circle using your protractor. All right. Then you must be able to initially convert these percentage values to degrees. You take the percentage, for example, 5% in terms of degrees, you say 5 divided by 100, multiply by 360, you will get a numerical value. All right, make sure you do that conversion first. After you get all of them, you do the calculation for all of them, make sure all of them are in fact adding up to 360. Okay, so that being said, everybody should know how to construct a pie chart based upon the initial work in Form 1 all the way down to Form 5 in maths class particularly. All right, any questions, just feel free to let me know. I could probably do a video for you all if you wish. All right, you can email me or whatever the case may be. B, part 1. Define the term pollution. Now, for 2 marks, pollution is a term, and I want you to remember this. All right, listen to this very carefully. If you have to write it down, write it down. When they say to define, you have to indicate what it is. Now, pollution is a term which refers to the introduction of substances, whether they are solid, liquid, or gas, or solid, liquid, or gaseous substances, into an environment, which can have adverse or negative effects upon human health, the environmental processes, or even upon the physical outlook or the aesthetics. Okay, so that is what the definition of pollution is. Whenever you hear the term aesthetics, aesthetics, it is in fact referring to the physical outlook of an area. Now, name one type of pollution and state one possible cause of the pollution. Now, students, we have a multitude. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a few. All right. One type of pollution can simply be, well, in terms of type, we can simply say air, the general types. We have air pollution, water pollution, we have land pollution, and we have noise pollution. Now, one possible cause of the pollution that is in fact named, all right, air pollution can be caused by the combustion of fossil fuels. Water pollution can be caused by the release of industrial wastes or agricultural waste or even domestic wastes into the rivers or streams or even into the coastal environments. All right. Air, land pollution, on the other hand, can actually be associated with the disposal of solid waste or even liquid wastes, right, from domestic, industrial, or even agricultural sources. Noise pollution, right, is a concept which is can be derived from excessive noise due to machinery, all right, due to heavy machinery in that regard, which may actually contribute to significantly high amplitudes, all right, that can actually contribute to also um, hearing impairment. All right, but the cause can be related to industrial activities, and the cause can also be related to even domestic activities as well. Now, part 3 is to describe two ways in which the type of pollution named in B1 can be reduced. Now, how can we reduce air pollution from industrial, where the cause is industrial activities? We can simply employ, all right, the use of alternative sources of energy. Instead of utilizing fossil fuels, which can be combusted and produce a lot of particulate matter and soot into the atmosphere, we can simply utilize different forms of energy, right? Either a combination of a few, like for example, you can use wind energy, you can use electric energy, which is battery related. You can also use solar energy. You can use hydroelectric power. All right. You can also contribute. You can utilize also geothermal energy. All right, that is one. Now, with respect to water pollution, which I indicated in the same B part one, I just decided to call it a few. That type of pollution, which is water pollution, we can actually, in terms of reducing the effect of water pollution, there can in fact be the enforcement of or the establishment of existing laws, which can have hefty penalties and fines, especially to those, all right, who are found breaching the law. Hefty penalties and fines or even jail time can be included. All right, these are major deterrents which can potentially be established. In terms of land pollution, the same thing can be applicable with respect to the hefty penalties and fines and also proper monitoring. And at the same time, we can encourage recycling initiatives. All right, if you recycle or you even reduce, all right, or even reuse, all right, materials which are in fact waste, you can technically reduce the bulk effect, which can eventually be lead into the waterways or even the land. All right, noise pollution, the same thing will be applicable to legislative measures and also proper enforcement. In some instances, right, to reduce the effects of noise pollution is primarily for infrastructural development and such. They would simply establish or erect a specific barrier that can help to minimize the effects of noise in the peripheral environments. And the same thing can also be associated with noise dampening devices, which can simply reduce the amplitude of such existing noise that is in fact emitted from certain types of devices or technology. All right, for example, certain drills, for example, they will be a little more silent, all right, in comparison to others, all right, in terms of their use. Anyway, so let's move on quickly. Part C, all right, explain how any three actions by humans can cause coral reef destruction. Now, this is somewhat of a repeat as well, I believe, from a previous past paper, if not 2011, but let's go through it quickly. Three actions by humans that can cause coral reef degradation, destruction. Number one, physical breakage of corals, especially by those who are seeking to acquire souvenirs, right? By diving into the coral reef environment and selfishly removing pieces of the corals for decor and souvenirs. That is terrible. All right, that is one. Two, improper fishing activities, such as one can be referred to either overfishing or even we can also employ the use of trawling mechanisms where heavy nets are dragged across the seabed, destroying the platform where these corals may exist. That is two. All right. Three. All right. Human beings, humans in particular, all right, as it relates to infrastructural development, which are potentially unplanned, right, can contribute to effluents or even construction dust moving from the interior or the coastal environments further out towards the direction of the sea. All right, this can contribute to sedimentation, which can lead to algae blooms, which can cause coral to be stifled or killed. Or it can contribute to even effluents, even human effluents and surface wastes. Human waste can actually be pumped into waterways, which can contribute to a very large extent high nutrient content. High nutrient content that can simply contribute to algae blooms that can outcompete coral productivity. All right. Part C. Describe 3 measures that can be used to reduce coral reef degradation. Now, first and foremost, all right, there should in fact be proper legislative measures and also proper enforcement where hefty penalties and fines and potential jail time can actually be associated with those all right, who are in breach, all right, of any environmental act and who are caught physically destroying the coral structures. That is one. Okay. Apart from that, there can be zoning regulations. For example, recreation activities can actually be zoned, all right, to the point where these individuals who are perhaps, like, say, in the marine environment, leisure activities like jet skiing, diving, and whatnot. This can actually be zoned to the point where you can have specific areas for people to be engaged actively in these activities. But in the coral reef region, should be an area which is demarcated for no form of or major form of recreational or leisure activities. This zoning regulation might actually contribute to less disturbance upon the coral reef structures. And in doing so, all right, less disturbance can contribute generally to less degradation. All right. Now, another one is land use planning. All right, there is something called Integrated Coastal Zone Management, or ICZM. Now, land use planning is a method, a component in that, because if land use planning and development is in fact ideal or proper, all right, associated with less or little disturbance upon the environment as it relates to pollution, all right, if we can account in terms of the amount of pollution that is in fact derived or produced from infrastructural development on the coast or in close proximity to the coast, then obviously that can simply relate to less disturbance upon the corals as relates to runoff and wind-blown, right, sediments from the land. All right, certain areas can be regarded as developmental zones, but certain areas should not. So land use planning and zoning regulations also kind of work hand in hand. All right. If I were to throw in another point in the mix, it should be taken into consideration that corals, well, education, coral reefs can in fact be somewhat maintained, right? If we foster a very sustainable culture, right, by educating the public, young and old, from private all the way down to the public sector, all right, educate them in terms of the importance and the significance of coral reefs, to which it can change their degree or their objective or their viewpoint and even their actions into a much more conservative or sustainable one, reducing their actual waste. If per capita waste is reduced and people actually follow a more stringent way, right, in terms of helping the environment, that can actually be beneficial, right, largely beneficial in terms of maintaining the coral reef structures, and the systems can be considered to be generally functional. All right, so now we are in the last question, which is question 10A. All right, on the grid provided as an insert for this question, use the data in table 5 to draw a line graph of the estimated projected average temperatures for country X between 2010 and 2040. Now, it is actually for 4 marks. Remember, you have to include a proper scale, you have to include a proper title, you have to plot your points properly, you have to label your axes, and do not draw a best fit line. Use a ruler and individually plot each point with a straight ruler. All right? Okay, so that is simple. Everybody knows to draw a line graph. Let's go through quickly. Now, part B, 10B, part 1. Define the following terms. Global warming. Now, this was actually done, I believe, in the past, but let's go through it very quickly. Global warming. What is global warming? Global warming is a natural phenomenon. However, it is influenced and accelerated by human activities, contributing to average global temperatures to increase, where existing greenhouse gas emissions, right, or greenhouse gases tend to absorb more warmth. All right, full stop. All right, so when we are talking about more warmth being absorbed, the incoming solar radiation technically is in fact absorbed by greenhouse gases, which contributes to average temperatures throughout the entire planet to increase. This is a global problem. This is a worldwide issue. All right. But global warming is natural, as we indicated, but it is influenced or accelerated by human activities. Okay. Now, the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is in fact a natural process whereby naturally existing gases, known as greenhouse gases, tend to absorb incoming solar radiation. And in doing so, it contributes to a warming effect of the planet. As indicated, it's a natural process. However, it is accelerated by human activities. What do we mean by that? Our activities, such as industrial, the manner in which we deforest the environment, um, the amount of emissions we produce, improper agricultural practices and stuff like that, as well as farming practices, can contribute generally to the runaway or to the enhanced greenhouse effect. All right. The greenhouse effect, it is becoming much more pronounced. Why? Because we human beings are pumping more and more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which is influenced by a lot of our activities on a very grand scale. Now, describe two causes of global warming. Now, in terms of actually mentioning two causes per se, we should know fully well. Let us focus one upon the extensive degree of deforestation that actually occurs in the world. All right. With the advent of population increases, there is expansion. All right. And this expansion contributes to need for settlement, and hence, deforestation or vegetative removal is in fact something which is very significant. Now, when we do that, we are replacing trees, right? We are removing trees rather, and in doing so, we are upsetting the gaseous cycles where naturally during the daytime for during photosynthetic processes, trees take in carbon dioxide and they give off oxygen in a larger concentration. But if we remove trees, there is in fact a greater concentration of carbon dioxide lingering in the atmosphere, and that will contribute to an enhanced greenhouse effect, which will eventually contribute to global warming. That is one. Apart from that, we must bear in mind that global warming can also be contributed to or influenced or caused by a significant degree of industrial activities, which involved a large concentration, all right, of greenhouse gas emissions being produced, mainly through the combustion of fossil fuels. And this adds to, like I said earlier, it adds to the greenhouse effect. It enhances the greenhouse effect, which contributes to global warming. All right, keep that in mind for me. Part C, part one, explain two likely effects of global warming on the Caribbean. Now, first and foremost, right, two likely effects of global warming would be, first and foremost, we'll have sea level rise, right? Sea level rise, which would in fact be influenced by not only the Caribbean. I'm sorry, it would in fact be influenced not only in the Caribbean, all right? The entire world will be subject to this. But in terms of the Caribbean, we must bear in mind that if we have a global warming issue, the actual sea level rise will be related to a greater degree of erosion along the coastal environments, and land will be subjected to a greater degree of loss because of the effects of erosion, coastal erosion that is by battering waves and greater concentration of water in relation to the land. This can contribute also to a greater degree of turbidity in the waters, which can affect even the coral productivity as well. All right. Secondly, we should also bear in mind that global warming can contribute to forest dieback or forest recession as the climatic conditions become from warm, it becomes hotter. All right, as the temperature increases, the environment becomes hotter because we are already existingly warm in the Caribbean. So if temperature goes up, it will become hotter and become potentially drier, which will also affect the hydrological cycle, and in doing so, can contribute to a greater degree of forest fires and, by extension, wilting of crops as well as the recession of vegetative cover naturally in the environment. All right. C, part two. Explain two causes of deforestation in the Caribbean. Deforestation, one of the main causes of deforestation is in fact the need for settlement expansion. All right, primarily because of the fact that the population is increasing and there is the greater need for lateral space. As a result, people tend to encroach more into natural forested areas to make way for housing and stuff like that, and residential areas as well. That's one. Two, there is also the need for agricultural productivity and agricultural expansion because as the population increases, there will in fact be greater need, all right, for food production to meet the demands of the growing population. And in doing so, commercial agriculture would in fact be a major factor contributing to a greater degree of deforestation in comparison to peasant or subsistence farming. But either way, the demands for agricultural produce based upon the existing trends of increasing populations, all right, in the Caribbean regions would actually contribute to a great degree of deforestation taking place. All right. Part three, using examples from the Caribbean, explain two consequences of deforestation. Now, first and foremost, I would like to utilize Haiti. All right, Haiti as an example. One of the consequences of deforestation is that the areas can actually be subjected to a great degree of biodiversity loss, and even the ground will become less fertile, or I should say futile. As a matter of fact, in Haiti, Haiti is actually based upon a 2019 statistic. Haiti was actually very close to being 100% deforested. All right. Um, Roughly, let's say roughly 1% of forest of natural vegetative cover remains. This is one of the reasons why a reduction in the biodiversity, a reduction in biota in general, and poor soils can tantamount to people suffering as it relates to food. There can in fact be severe food shortages and famine. All right. In this regard, we must take into consideration that recently we heard that people were in fact eating mud pies to survive in Haiti, where mineral oils are in fact mixed with mud. Malnutrition is crazy in that particular country. It is ridiculous. And it was to facilitate the growing population in Haiti in the past, decades upon decades to now, right? Areas of the land were in fact greatly compromised and removed, cleared to facilitate unplanned development, to harbor the population. All right, so you see how deforestation can contribute to even social or socioeconomic effects. All right, that is one. Secondly, I like to focus on Trinidad for a minute. The northern range, right? There's a lot of forest fires, which many of them are in fact humanly induced, right? They are set by people. All right, we have to understand, especially the upper regions of the slope along the Maracas areas, as well as certain parts of Paramin and also certain parts of Diego Martin, as well as Santa Cruz. That level of deforestation taking place can result in the soils becoming less stable, and as a result, can be subjected to subsidence or earth movement processes. Landslides can, in fact, become significant. So, deforestation contributes to landslides, especially if the land becomes lubricated primarily during the wet season or when there is, in fact, a great downpour. All right, and this happens right here in Trinidad, as a matter of fact. Now, it's advisable to utilize your normal or your basic examples that right here in your Caribbean country or in your Caribbean country, whichever one you decide, or you can simply utilize because you should be aware what is actually taking place right in your home country. All right, so students, these are in fact two consequences of deforestation. This will take us to the end of the 2012 paper. I hope it was informative. Anybody have any questions, feel free to let me know. You all have my email. At the same time, I will do further videos for 2013 and 2014 for section C and D respectively. All right, you all keep good.